Well, next up on our list of teams to preview, none other than one of my favorite teams, the Columbus Crew. Got their jersey. You can see it in some of our old videos. It was a wonderful gift for my kids to have that distinct checkerboard pattern hanging in the background and hanging in my closet right now. Columbus being the first MLS franchise, there's a little nostalgia there. Being a Midwestern team, there's a connection there for us. So happy to be previewing Columbus right now, but unfortunately, nostalgia doesn't help you out in the standings. History doesn't help you out in the standings, and Columbus has a long road to get back to prominence, to get back and maybe add that second star on their jersey. I don't think it's going to come this season because some of their biggest signings that they've brought in were Darlington Nagbe and Fernando Adi, who just was announced today. And Adi has signed to what's reportedly a TAM deal. He's not going to take up a DP spot. So those are their big signings, as well as midfielder Lucas Zellerian, a transfer in from Tigres of Liga MX. They also added Axel Skjoberg, Matt Lampson, Vito Wormgoor, Aiden Morris, and none other than Triple G's son, Sebastian Berhalter, to a homegrown deal. So those are the players in for Columbus. Those are the guys looking to add a little depth, or in the cases of Nagbe and Adi, make an immediate impact on the starting 11. Players.
How do our USMNT fans feel about Sebastian Berhalter signing to the Columbus Crew? So anybody that's an avid follower of USMNT, let us know down in the comments here on YouTube or, on Twitter. Let us know your thoughts on Sebastian Berhalter and his homegrown contract with the Columbus Crew.
Yeah, I'm guessing they have no thoughts since he has no impact on the USMNT right now. Well, if you're part of the tinfoil hat conspiracies of all the patronage going on in USMNT with Greg and Jay Berhalter, then hey, yeah, maybe we do see Sebastian get called up some point relatively quickly. But
I'm not talking about getting called up to the USMNT. I just think it's very interesting that this guy gets signed to a homegrown deal. So thoughts there, not necessarily him getting pulled into the USMNT.
Okay.
That's not even a chance.
So we can keep our tinfoil hats on for now. It's just nothing
I
national
just want
team
the
related.
tinfoil hats for how this guy got signed to a contract.
Okay. I'm sure he earned it. He's been with their academy system. I'm sure he earned his way just like everybody else in American soccer. Let's be honest there. Now, back to the Columbus Crew roster. The players on the outs, David Akam traded to Nashville, and Luis Argudo was picked up in the expansion draft. So those are kind of the two names that we would recognize. The rest of the group has had their options declined. Goalie Ben Lundgaard, defender Alex Crognale, midfielders Guzman, Opoku, Sosa, Clark, Federico Higuain, the biggest name possibly in Columbus Crew history, had his option declined as well. So we saw his last couple years kind of plagued by injury and underperformance, and really he was just trying to do what he was able to do through sheer willpower and veteran guile. But unfortunately, it looks like his legs gave out on him, and the club is kind of in this weird transition time, redoing the roster, so they declined Higuain, Pipa's option there. And then finally, defender Condor Maloney's option was declined. So those are the roster moves by Columbus lately. But again, I think any sort of players on the out have been able to be offset by bringing in Fernando Adi and bringing in Darlington Nagbe, a couple of guys who are immediately going to improve the offense for this Crew team. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, definitely. Lots more movement in than movement out. You've got Darlington Nagbe is going to make an impact regardless of our opinions on him over the past year and a half. He's going to make an impact on this Columbus side as well. Axel Skjoberg is a good signing. He's a steady MLS vet. He was a best 11 MLS guy a couple years ago. Lucas Zellerian from Tigres. If you're coming from Tigres, you got to be good. Although I do have some thoughts on him, and I'll get into that a little bit in this DP review. Fernando Adi is not really it's not a great signing. For as bad as this guy has been over the past season and a half, even with Portland before he left for Cincinnati, he has not been good. But getting reunited with Caleb Porter, maybe and most likely into a spot where he's coming in off the bench, not a ton of pressure on him, I think that can bode well for Columbus. Dangerous team with some of these additions they made. And got to give a shout out to the former TFC general manager, Tim Bezbachenko, who's now the president over there. He's doing a good job. It's a very solid offseason for Columbus. So that's my thoughts on the players in and out. Now let's talk a little bit about the designated players. So I want to jump right in with Lucas Zelarayan, 27-year-old, signed from Tigres in December. He's an attacking midfielder. He can play the wing, prefers to play more of a number 10 spot, but he can play the wing. $8.5 million transfer fee. Not great career assist numbers. So that's what really sticks out to me. When you're playing that number 10 in MLS, you've got to have – that's kind of what the number 10s are judged by, right? So you got, Sasha Kljestan a couple of years ago. He was that number 10 for the Red Bulls. You've got Victor Vasquez a couple of years ago for Toronto FC. It was all about the assists. Yeah, you can pitch in with some goals. That's great. But really need those assist numbers to be big. This is one of the places where he kind of lacks a little bit when you go back and look at his career stats with Tigres. Not a ton. He really never impressed me in the games that I watched for Tigres. Now, mind you, it was a very small handful of games that I watched Tigres, mostly all in the CCL. So I don't really watch many Liga MX games. But he really didn't really shine to me on Tigres like some of the other players. Obviously, like Gignac, they had Enter Valencia. There was definitely Vargas at the back really played well. There was a lot of guys on those teams that really stood out to me, and he didn't really stand out as a great player. So I'm a little concerned about it. I think there's a little bit more hype than anything else for this guy, and I'm hoping for Columbus's sake that he proves me wrong, because anytime we get a Liga MX guy moving into MLS, I really want him to do well to continue to grow MLS. So that's my thoughts on Zelarayan. Nick, why don't you take either some thoughts on him as well as the other DPs?
No, I think you did a great job filling in everyone on Zelarayan. And yeah, if he's going to be the number 10 for Columbus, there's a lot of players who have wore that number and wore it well and played very well for the Crew. So there's a lot of history there to live up to. But as we said, history does not a successful team make. Looking at Pedro Santos, the 31-year-old, he's got to have a much better season. Last season, he had 11 goals and 6 assists, improving on his 2018 season, but it always seemed like he was on the verge of being a great player. And maybe it was the fact that Higuain was hurt. Maybe it was the fact that there was some roster turnover. We saw Zardes missing a lot of time for national team call-ups. But I always felt that Pedro Santos he has to take the next step in his game, even at 31-year-old. He's the DP. He's the guy that's going to really try to find the open man. He's probably got one of the highest soccer IQs on the team. He's just got to translate it into his play. And I think if he can pick up his game, that will make Zelarayan better. That will make Zardes better, because we know Zardes is looking to pass and get other offensive-minded players involved in the play as much as he is about scoring his own goals. So if Zardes is going to be looking for Pedro, kind of trailing on a run, dummying a ball through to the far post, Pedro's got to take advantage of that. He does that, Columbus is a playoff team. He has another mediocre season, Columbus misses the playoffs. For me, he's the most important player, and I know you're going to talk about Gyasi Zardes as your most important player, and it's hard not to. The guy is potentially, arguably, he is the top scorer for Americans in the MLS. Like, he is going to be the one that is going to get the lion's share of goals for Columbus. But to me, Pedro Santos has to be the one to kind of put it all together.
Yeah, Pedro Santos, he really has to improve upon his finishing. He had better stats last season than he did in the shortened season, like kind of the half season that he had with Columbus in 2018, where he only had 1 goal and 7 assists. Last year, he had 11 goals and 6 assists. That's decent. His finishing is, I mean, when you're watching this guy, he's kind of like a Nemanja Nikolic type. And you know how we feel about Nemanja Nikolic. This guy there's been so many times where you're like, oh, it's a goal. And then he misses it. You're like, what? How did he miss that and not finish that? So if he can improve on his finishing, and continue that growth of the stats, he can definitely be the most important piece for Columbus. Gyasi Zardes, though, is that guy. 13 goals last season, 19 goals the year before for Columbus. As Gyasi Zardes goes, so do the Columbus Crew. Now, bringing in a guy like Fernando Adi, that kind of changes things up a little bit. All that weight is not necessarily going to be strictly on him. They could possibly go into a two up front type of formation, where this has been a team who's played a lone striker formation for a very long time. So that they could change things up, bringing in Adi. Move Pedro Santos up to the front a little bit. So lots of different options. That Adi move definitely opens things up for Caleb Porter. But Gyasi Zardes, I think he's going to be very important to this team. So those are my thoughts on those guys, Nick.
Yeah, and you're right with bringing in Adi, bringing in a youngster in J.J. Williams, who's a 22-year-old Generation Adidas striker. He had 7 goals in the USL last season for Birmingham, so he knows how to find the back of the net. Let's just see if he can be that great supplemental player for the rest of the squad. Maybe you see him in a lot of U.S. Open Cup action against maybe some lesser talented opponents. He could be the breakout player, that complementary striker to work with Zardes, to work with Adi, and to maybe pair up well with Nagbe once they get the attack going. So look for J.J. Williams to be that breakout youngster. But you're right in saying that they've been playing a lot of lone striker in the past. But Caleb Porter has always talked about trying to keep what Berhalter built and tweak it a little bit to play the way he wants to, or to take advantage of certain matchups that he sees when they're prepping for their opponents. So maybe we see them line up in a 4-4-2 or a 4-2-3-1 with a lone striker up front, but really look for a lot of these players to get out to the wings, get some mismatches, get some odd numbers, get some player overloads, and then see if they can't get that ball in the middle, see if Zardes can't link up with Santos running on, or Adi running on, or running in for a header or something like that. So look for that really kind of 1-2 give and go. What is great about what Berhalter built and what Porter has kept in place is kind of that back line. And for the starting 11, Mike, that you put together, you have Valenzuela, Sjoberg, Mensah, and Affel as the starting back four, with Eloy Room as the projected goalkeeper there. That's an excellent back line. Harrison Affel and Mensah, those guys are household MLS names if you've been around the league. If you're just starting to get into the league and starting to figure out who these guys are, watch those two guys play, because not only can they mark very well, they know how to transition into the attack. That's something that Berhalter has instilled, that when you're moving forward, when you transition from the defense to the offense, and I'm Greek here, I'm talking with my hands just underneath the camera, so sorry if it looks a little ping-pongy there. When you're transitioning from the defense to the offense, you know where your players should be. You look to knock the ball into that space versus looking up and finding where they're at the time. Those guys know how to play that very well and can really spring a transition. Then moving up from the midfield, you've got Will Trapp and Artur. Again, two guys who have been in the system for a long time, two guys who are very familiar with each other and their Columbus Crew teammates, who are going to be able to help break out and help that transition and get the ball forward. And then we've got Pedro Santos, Silla Ryan, Nagbe playing in that three kind of attacking midfielders role, and then Gyasi Zardes as the lone striker, as we have it set up now. But we'll see what Porter tweaks. And in today's game, not just in the MLS, but around the world, a starting lineup is only something you put on paper. As the game unfolds, your players are moving all over the pitch, getting to the positions where they need to. You see adjustments made where strikers are dropping back to the defense to try and receive and get some more touches and influence the game. You see guys on the wings getting into the channels behind the defense if they can, exploiting that space if it's there for them. So these formations are all very fluid, and that's the way the modern soccer game is played. So that's my take on the starting 11, on the breakout youngster as we roll through Columbus here. Mike, any of that you want to touch on or add to, and then let's dive into the ceiling and the floor for the Crew.
Yeah, just as a breakout youngster there, J.J. Williams, a striker, 22-year-old, 17 appearances last season for Birmingham Legion of the USL, and scored 7 goals. So decent strike rate there in the USL. And again, That was, I think that he kind of took a hit as a breakout youngster today with the signing of Adi, because he's probably not going to get as many minutes now as he was going to before Adi. But other than that, most important player, Gyasi Zardes, you got to get an improvement in goals from Gyasi Zardes. If he regresses, it's trouble for Crew, just because, the depth at striker. Fernando Adi, remember, this is a guy coming off a really bad year, some personal issues as far as, DUIs and whatnot. He could be a complete bust and turn out to be nothing. And then you've got Jay Hamilton and J.J. Williams backing him up. So not a ton of depth there if Adi doesn't work out. So that he's very, very important from that standpoint. And they're going to get some goals from the midfield. Santos is going to come through. Zelarayan is going to score some goals. We touched on that earlier. But really Zardes needs to carry the load for this team to be successful. So with that being said, predictions as far as ceiling and floor for this club. I think the ceiling, if all goes well, is going to compete towards the top of the Eastern Conference and get themselves a home playoff game. I currently have them sitting in about the 4th seed in the East. I think they could jump into possibly even the 3rd seed, maybe compete for that top in the Eastern Conference, but that's going to be pushing it. So I'm going to stick probably with the 4th seed in the East as far as ceiling. Floor is going to be barely missing the playoffs. I think this team will just miss out. They've got a lot of talent, but if all goes for naught, then I expect to see them miss the playoffs and be one of those teams that's kind of fighting for one of those last spots in the Eastern Conference. Nick, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to compete for a top 3 spot in the Eastern Conference. You know how stacked New York City is, Atlanta is, and I just don't see Columbus bouncing back from last season's performance with the turnover on the roster to a 3 seed. I think you're right. A 4 seed is probably the best case scenario for them. Get that one home game. If all their attacking players come together and if the defense can hold, yes, then they could probably fight for a 4 seed. And then, yeah, if they continue this roster transition, if they experiment a little more with Porter's tactics and formations, if they continue to turn over the roster, bring in new signings, if Fernando Adi doesn't work out, then, yeah, they'll miss the playoffs. But, hey, the Eastern Conference, we saw it last year. What separated, like, the 5th seed and the 10th seed? What was it, like 4 points maybe by the end of the season? It was a very, very tight Eastern Conference race. I expect more of the same because I don't think anyone in the East has really made a huge improvement as far as talent goes. So it'll be tight, but yeah, worst case scenario, they're on the outside looking in yet again. We're going to get our first taste of the Columbus Crew March 1st. They host New York City FC, the aforementioned top team in the East from last year. So we will get a chance to see if they can get the season off on the right foot at home against a worthy opponent. And we'll see if New York City can adjust to leaving the phone booth for a little bit and heading out to Columbus Crew. That was for you, Mike. I preempted your shot at New York City's tiny field.
New York City, and we talked about the small pitch. I love it. The Columbus Crew preview is now complete with that.
And we are going to take a quick break, hear a word from our sponsors, and then wrap up our show with a preview of Sporting Kansas City. So stay tuned for that.